Marisol had just finished her evening rounds at Riverdale Hospital, but she could not bring herself to clock out while the orange sky outside the windows still glowed with goodbye light, its warmth brushing the polished floor like a final pat on the shoulder. She noticed Mr. Bennett, the frail man in room 312, staring at the ceiling as if the flicker of the fluorescent bulb held the answer to a question too heavy for words, his eyes wide and searching. The monitors near his bed hummed their steady electronic song, each beep a small drum urging someone, anyone, to stay and listen a little longer, their green lines pulsing like tiny heart-shaped rivers across black glass. Most of the staff had already hurried home to spaghetti dinners, cartoons with kids, and piles of unsorted laundry, leaving the corridors hollow and echoing like shells forgotten on a quiet beach. Marisol thought about her own empty apartment, the leftover soup sitting in her fridge, and the silent phone that would not ring even if she waited all night, a loneliness she rarely admitted aloud. She paused at the doorway and asked gently whether he needed anything, hoping he might at least want water or a fluff of his pillow to justify her lingering, fingers curled around the chart in nervous hope. Mr. Bennett lifted his trembling hand an inch, then let it fall, whispering that the thing he needed most could not be poured from a pitcher or delivered on a cart. It was company, plain and simple. He said he was not afraid of the pain, but he was afraid of being forgotten in the short hours that stretched between now and the place he felt pulling him, a confession so soft it wavered like fog. Marisol's heart squeezed, because she knew that fear more intimately than she allowed herself to admit, though she had decades to go before anyone would label her terminal. She pulled up the single metal chair beside his bed, ignoring the ache in her calves from 12 hours on her feet, and decided to lend him the rest of her evening as if gifting him the last page of her shift. The clock on the wall clicked to 7:13, a time that felt oddly important even though she did not yet understand why, and she promised herself she would leave only when he slept. Mr. Bennett asked her to tell stories, ordinary ones about cafeteria gossip and the silly jokes the maintenance crew told, because tiny slices of normal life tasted better than hospital custard. She described the new pudding flavor, banana caramel swirl, that the dietitian swore would boost calorie counts, and the way everyone secretly took 2 cups when nobody looked, smuggling sweetness into long days. He smiled and closed his eyes, picturing a summer fair from long ago where he had won a stuffed bear for his daughter by tossing rings over milk bottles, a memory wobbling like sunlight on water. Marisol asked if he wanted music, but he said the sound of her voice was music enough, so she kept talking about nothing and everything in a gentle river of words that never once ran dry. The lights in the hallway dimmed to night mode, yet the room felt brighter, as if their shared stories painted warm murals on the blank walls that no budget committee could ever erase. Between tales, she dabbed a cool cloth across his forehead and adjusted the blanket to his shoulders, actions that felt like stitches mending a tear in the evening's fragile fabric. He spoke of his late wife Ruth, who laughed with her whole body and baked cinnamon rolls that filled a house with a smell better than any holiday candle, a scent he feared forgetting. Each memory glowed like a firefly in the dusk of his fading thoughts, and Marisol caught every single one, letting them land gently in the quiet air before they blinked away. The silence between beeps grew longer, the sound of his breath softer, yet he looked peaceful, as though he had traded the weight of fear for a quilt of companionship stitched by her presence. She called a night doctor only once to confirm pain meds were not needed yet, then returned, unwilling to surrender the fragile calm they had woven together from shared minutes. The window at the far end of the room showed the last slice of sunset disappearing, a brave sliver of gold resisting the blanket of night as long as it could. Mr. Bennett whispered that sunsets reminded him life was a painting finished edge by edge, and he felt the brush finally reach his corner of the canvas, words carried on a breath light as tissue paper. Marisol nodded, tears pricking, but she kept her voice steady, promising the colors would stay bright in her memory even after the light was gone. He asked if someone would water the jade plant on his sill at home. She assured him she would visit, snap a picture, and send it to his daughter, sealing the vow with a gentle squeeze of his hand. Relief softened the deep lines around his mouth, and for a moment he seemed years younger, as if simple kindness operated a secret time machine. The night nurse peeked in, saw Marisol, and gave a small, approving smile, recognizing that some duties are never listed on a shift roster. Mr. Bennett's breathing slowed, not struggling, just quieter, like a lullaby played softer as a child drifts off. She chatted about the volunteer puppy parade scheduled for Friday, explaining how the dogs would wear vests that read, "Pet me, I'm friendly," and how their tails doubled as laughter gauges. A ghost of a chuckle escaped him, followed by a content sigh that sounded like agreement to meet those puppies somewhere beyond sterile walls. The room's clock reached 8:26, and Marisol noticed time felt elastic, stretching long and thin like melted sugar between their shared stories. She unfolded a pocket Bible he had left on the side table and read the psalm he requested, her quiet voice gliding over the words like a fingertip across still water. He mouthed the final verse with her, proving memories of faith endure even when muscles forget how to lift a spoon. A stillness settled, delicate and complete, blanketing the bed like first snow on a silent street. Marisol recognized the moment without panic. She pressed the call button but kept holding his hand, unwilling to break the last link too soon. The doctor entered, performed the small formalities, and nodded slowly, acknowledging that dignity had been preserved. Marisol whispered good night, not goodbye, because goodbyes felt both too heavy and too small at once. The word good night carried hope of another morning somewhere. She smoothed his blanket one last time, silenced the monitor now drawing a single straight line, and stepped back with tears she finally let fall. The hallway lights seemed softer on her walk out, as if the building itself had dimmed its voice in respect for the gentle passing it had witnessed. Marisol clocked out at 9:02, later than ever, yet she felt lighter than she had in months, carrying with her the hush of a sunset shared in room 312 and the quiet truth that kindness is never off duty. Marisol nodded, tears pricking, but she kept her voice steady, promising him the colors would stay bright in her memory even after the light was gone. He asked if someone would remember to water the jade plant on his sill at home. She said she would visit, take a picture, and send it to his daughter. A look of relief softened the deep lines around his mouth, and for a moment he seemed years younger, as if simple kindness worked like a time machine. The night nurse peeked in, saw Marisol, and gave a small approving smile, recognizing that some duties were not written in any shift roster. Mr. Bennett's breathing slowed, not struggling, just growing quieter, like a lullaby played softer as a child drifts off. She kept talking, telling him about the volunteer puppy parade scheduled for Friday, explaining how the dogs wore a little vest saying, "Pet me, I'm friendly." A ghost of a chuckle escaped him, followed by a content sigh that sounded like agreement to meet those puppies somewhere beyond the hospital walls. The room's clock reached 8:26, and Marisol noticed that time felt elastic, stretching long and thin like melted sugar between their words. She unfolded a pocket Bible he had left on the side table and read the psalm he requested, her quiet voice threading through respirations. He mouthed the final verse along with her, proving memories of faith endure even when muscles forget how to lift a spoon. The stillness arrived, delicate and complete, settling over the bed like first snow on a silent street. Marisol recognized the moment without panic. She pressed the call button but kept holding his hand, unwilling to break the last link too soon. The doctor entered, performed the small formalities, and nodded slowly, acknowledging dignity had been preserved this evening. Marisol whispered good night, not goodbye, because goodbyes felt too heavy yet too small all the same. She smoothed his blanket one last time, switched off the monitor that now drew a single straight line, and stepped back with tears she allowed herself to feel. The hallway lights seemed softer on her walk out, as if the building respected the gentle passing it had witnessed. Marisol clocked out at 9:02, later than ever, yet she felt lighter than she had in months, carrying with her the hush of a sunset shared in room 312. Marisol arrived early the next morning, expecting the usual blur of 4 alarms and breakfast trays, but the emptiness of room 312 felt like a broken shell left on a quiet beach. Someone had stripped the bed, folded the blankets, and rolled the heart monitor away, leaving only the faint shadow of furniture pressed into the floor tile. In that blank space, she felt the echo of Mr. Bennett's final sunset, a soft memory that clung to her scrubs like the gentle smell of lavender soap. She finished her shift with automatic motions, yet every time she reached for a chart, her mind replayed his quiet laugh about the coming puppy parade. After work, she walked 2 blocks to the small florist that sold single stems for the price of a bus ticket and bought a white lily just because it was kind. She carried it to the cemetery listed in his record, not sure if anyone else would be there to say farewell, the April sky stretching pale and thoughtful overhead. A single folding chair waited by the grave, and a slim woman with gray streaks in her curls stood beside it, her eyes red yet bright when she spotted Marisol. This was Caroline, the daughter Mr. Bennett had spoken of, and she reached out to hold Marisol's hand the way friends do even before they know each other well. They shared the brief service with just the minister, the lily, and a breeze that rattled dry leaves like applause for a life quietly well lived. When the final prayer ended, Caroline thanked Marisol for staying late, explaining that the nurse's name had been the last thing her father whispered on the phone days earlier. Marisol tried to shrug off the praise, insisting any nurse on duty would have done the same, though she knew many would have chosen the easy path home. Caroline placed a small envelope in Marisol's pocket, telling her it was something her father had prepared and that she should open it when her heart felt ready. The nurse spent that evening at her kitchen table staring at the envelope while steam from reheated soup fogged her glasses like a tiny cloud of doubt. At last she broke the seal and found a thank you card painted with watercolor sunflowers and a single sentence in shaky handwriting that read, "Your kindness painted my last day gold." Below the line lay another note in neat print, stating that Marisol would soon receive a call from Locke and Pierce, attorneys at law, about Mr. Bennett's estate. Her spoon froze above the bowl, tomato broth dripping back like slow tears while she read the words 3 times to make sure she was not dreaming. An estate sounded grand, but she pictured his thin hospital gown and doubted he owned much beyond a jade plant and a stack of crossword books. She tried to believe it might only be paperwork about medical bills or permission to post memories online, nothing more complicated than that. The week that followed blurred into double shifts, late buses, and aching arches until a crisp voice rang through her phone during a rare Saturday nap. The lawyer, Mr. Pierce, asked for a meeting downtown on Wednesday morning and advised her to bring identification and an open heart. Marisol searched the firm online and saw glossy photos of oak desks and leather chairs that felt worlds away from plastic clipboards and rolling vitals carts. Wednesday arrived damp with spring rain, and she borrowed a navy blazer from a coworker, pinning it with a safety pin because the fit was too wide. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like traveling to a different planet, each ding marking altitude, both physical and social. The receptionist ushered her into a conference room where paintings of calm sailboats lined the walls, their tidy sails catching imaginary wind. Mr. Pierce greeted her with a firm handshake warm enough to melt the stiffness in her shoulders, then opened a thick folder embossed with Mr. Bennett's name. He offered sympathy first, honoring the courage it took to keep a lonely vigil, and Marisol blushed, wishing the polished table could hide her modest sneakers. Then he read a letter from Mr. Bennett describing the peace of his final night, the beauty of shared stories, and the deep gratitude he felt toward the nurse who stayed. Marisol's eyes filled as she listened to her own actions retold like lines from a gentle play she barely remembered performing. At last the lawyer slid a single sheet across the table, explaining that Mr. Bennett had added a gift for Marisol in his will 2 months earlier. The bequest, he said, included his small house on Maple Lane, a savings account, and the jade plant that greeted every sunrise from the kitchen sill. Marisol blinked, certain she had misheard, because rent on her tiny studio already devoured half her pay, and she had accepted scraping by as permanent. The lawyer passed her a tissue and added that the house was modest but free of debt, with a garden Mr. Bennett had tended until arthritis won the battle. He handed over a simple inventory, 1 bedroom, 1 study, a dusty piano, boxes of family photos, and a shed filled with half-finished birdhouses. She felt the room tilt, as if kindness had shifted gravity and pulled her into a new orbit where generosity could outweigh family ties. Caroline entered then, having waited in the hall, and hugged Marisol tightly, explaining that peace had settled on her because her father's choice felt exactly right. They agreed that stories of the quiet vigil would honor him better than flowers, and they planned a weekend visit so Marisol could see her unexpected inheritance. On the bus ride home, city lights reflected on the wet streets, doubling themselves like promises whispered twice for luck in the evening gloom. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, clutched the envelope of documents, and wondered how many sunsets could bloom from one night of kindness. The bus hissed to a stop outside her building, and she stepped into a puddle, yet even the splash felt like applause praising late hours and gentle words. Upstairs, she set the photo of the jade plant on her dresser, smiling at its plump leaves while whispering a vow to water it soon, then drifted to sleep certain her kindness had found a lasting home. Saturday morning found Marisol and Caroline standing before the little blue house on Maple Lane, umbrellas tilted against a drizzle that sounded like applause on the oak leaves overhead as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. The paint had faded to the color of worn denim, yet the porch swing moved back and forth on its own slow rhythm, like it already knew new stories were about to arrive as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Inside, dust motes drifted through beams of pale sunlight, turning the quiet living room into a tiny planetarium where every speck felt like a distant star waiting for names as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. The air smelled of cedar cigar boxes and dried lavender sachets, a scent both grandpa warm and garden fresh that made Marisol breathe deeper than the damp city ever allowed as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. They began in the study, where neat stacks of birdhouse sketches lay beside jars of paintbrushes frozen in colorful silence. Proof of plans paused rather than abandoned as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Caroline traced one sketch with her finger and laughed that her father never built two birdhouses the same, insisting every sparrow deserved custom real estate as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Marisol imagined the nurse birds telling stories inside those tiny homes, teaching hatchlings that kindness sometimes swoops down wearing hospital scrubs instead of feathers as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. The kitchen held a small round table and a window wide enough to frame the jade plant, its fat leaves glossy and brave despite weeks without watering as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Marisol carried the plant to the sink, letting cool water trickle through dry soil, while promising aloud to keep it alive as a daily thank you as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. The promise felt heavy and good, like a vow carved into wood rather than whispered into wind as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Caroline opened the refrigerator and grinned at a single forgotten cinnamon roll, still sealed in plastic wrap and looking far too proud to throw away as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. They split the treat, the sugar glaze sticking to their fingertips, and agreed that a house remembering sweetness could not stay empty long as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. In the narrow hallway, they discovered framed photos of Ruth in a polka dot dress, twirling barefoot on a summer lawn, while Bennett clapped out a frame as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. One shelf held faded ticket stubs from county fairs, pressed between pages of a gardening book like secret bookmarks of joy as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Marisol felt each object welcoming her, not as a stranger intruding, but as a caretaker whose heart had already been measured and found trustworthy as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. The bedroom surprised her with walls painted soft peach, the same shade as the sunset she and Mr. Bennett watched in his final hour as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to rain tapping the roof, hearing within the pattern a steady heartbeat that matched the one line she had seen in the monitor as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Caroline suggested they sort paperwork, yet neither moved, caught in a quiet moment that felt stitched together by invisible thread as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Finally, they opened the desk drawer, finding neat envelopes labeled utilities, taxes, and dreams, the last containing handwritten notes for future acts of generosity as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. One note outlined a scholarship fund for nursing students who promised to work in underfunded clinics, an idea that made Marisol's throat tighten with pride as birds outside sang gentle morning songs. Another listed repairs the house might need, each task followed by a playful reminder to reward yourself with pie afterward, because tools and treats belong together. Marisol realized Mr. Bennett had lived life like a gardener, pruning sorrow, watering hope, and trusting others to harvest when his hands grew tired. She whispered that she would finish the list, pie rewards included, and Caroline squeezed her shoulder in agreement. Together they opened the old upright piano in the corner of the study, the ivory keys yellowed but still eager for song. Marisol played the first halting measures of a lullaby her mother once sang, the notes shaky yet honest, filling the house with soft courage. Rain slowed outside, and sunlight pushed through thinning clouds, striping the hardwood floor with bright lanes that looked like pathways toward tomorrow. Caroline placed fresh sheets on the bed while Marisol carried boxes of photos to the living room, making piles marked Keep, Share, and Museum of Giggles. They laughed at a snapshot of Bennett wearing a ridiculous turkey hat, apparently ruling Thanksgiving dessert with comedic authority. Every story Caroline told painted her father larger than the frailty Marisol had known, rounding out the man behind the patient gown. They found a small safe behind a bookshelf containing modest savings, along with a note reading in bold letters, "Use this to water more jade plants in this big thirsty world." The lawyer had mentioned the account, but holding the passbook made the gift feel suddenly real and wonderfully heavy in Marisol's hands. She told Caroline her plan to fund the scholarship exactly as Bennett had sketched, adding a line that recipients must promise one act of bedside kindness per shift. Caroline wiped her eyes and said her father would have danced a silly jig at that idea, bad knees or not. When they finally stepped onto the porch again, afternoon sun painted the backyard golden, and the swing creaked hello in its calm language of ropes and wood. Marisol realized hours had passed without her checking a phone, a clock, or a worry, as if kindness had paused time so hearts could unpack safely. Caroline locked the door and pressed the key into Marisol's palm, saying the house would bloom best with someone who understood quiet courage. The weight of the key felt like a small but steady heartbeat, promising shelter not just from rain but from doubt. Marisol promised to invite Caroline for cinnamon rolls once the kitchen smelled like home again, already planning which recipe might match Ruth's legend. They said goodbye beside the blooming lilac bush, its purple clusters buzzing softly with bees who clearly approved of new beginnings. Marisol walked toward the bus stop, drizzle now a bright mist that kissed her cheeks like gentle applause from the sky, and she looked back to see sunlight glowing in the study window as if Mr. Bennett were waving her onward. Marisol spent the next week commuting between Riverdale Hospital and Maple Lane, her backpack stuffed with paint sample cards and folders of scholarship paperwork, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Every morning she watered the jade plant, humming the lullaby she had played on the piano, and the leaves grew shinier, as if cheering her on, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Afterward she tackled the peeling porch rail, sanding old paint until wood grain peeked through like ripples in a calm pond, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Neighbors walking dogs paused to wave, curious about the young nurse fixing the forgotten house. She waved back, shy but pleased, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. On Friday, Mr. Alvarez from 2 doors down offered his ladder and a bucket of sky blue paint that matched the house's faded siding, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Marisol accepted, promising cinnamon rolls for payment, and Mr. Alvarez grinned, saying baked goods were better currency than dollars, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Inside, she reorganized the study, stacking birdhouse plans in neat binders labeled spring, summer, and someday, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. The scholarship application went live online, titled the Bennett Kind Heart Fund, and within hours emails from hopeful students filled her inbox, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Caroline helped review essays each evening, sitting at the round kitchen table, while the smell of fresh primer drifted down the hall, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Many essays told stories of small hospitals where one extra nurse could change everything, and Marisol felt tears blur the words more than once, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. She decided every applicant deserved an encouraging note even if funds ran out, because kindness multiplies when spoken aloud, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Saturday brought heavy rain, but the patched roof held firm, proving Bennett's repair list had not exaggerated priorities, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Marisol played the piano during the storm, her chords steadier now, echoing through rooms stripped of cobwebs and doubt, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. The music drifted outside, and neighborhood kids splashing in puddles stopped to listen, faces tilted like sunflowers toward sound, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. One little girl named Aisha knocked and asked if lessons were free. Marisol laughed and said the first song cost only a smile, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. By Monday, the exterior was painted, the porch swing freshly oiled, and lilac scent floated into every open window, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Marisol printed scholarship finalist names on bright paper leaves and pinned them to a bulletin board titled Garden of Future Nurses, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Each leaf carried a promise, to greet patients by name, to stay 1 minute longer when fears sat heavy, to share pudding on lonely days, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. The house felt alive with these vows, as though walls could hear and store them like favorite songs, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. She emailed finalist invitations to a video interview, making sure her questions were simple, fair, and centered on compassion rather than grades, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. At the hospital, word spread about the fund, and coworkers left spare change and encouraging notes in her locker, turning metal into a message board, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Dr. Patel volunteered to mentor winners, explaining that good doctors are forged by great nurses who first teach them how to listen, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. The maintenance staff offered leftover paint for birdhouses, joking they wanted sparrows to enroll in kindness school too, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Marisol laughed, grateful, and scheduled a weekend build-and-paint party under the backyard maple, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. On the chosen Saturday, sunshine glazed the lawn like warm honey, and volunteers arrived carrying drills, snacks, and bright ideas, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Caroline brought Ruth's cinnamon roll recipe on a flour-dusted index card, declaring tradition tastes best when shared, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. The air rang with hammer taps, chatter, and the faint hum of a portable speaker playing upbeat oldies Bennett had loved, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Children dipped brushes into rainbow colors, creating birdhouses that looked like tiny carnival tents ready for feathered guests, and the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Marisol paused often to snap photos, sending them to scholarship applicants so they could see the community rooting for them. And the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. By sunset, 10 new birdhouses hung from branches, and the maple looked like a festival lantern tree lighting hope for passing wings. And the afternoon breeze carried hopes along the quiet lane. Everyone gathered on the porch steps, icing smeared and paint speckled, to eat cinnamon rolls and tell stories about kindness received and given. Mr. Alvarez raised a paper cup of lemonade and toasted Bennett, calling him the silent architect of every smile that day. Marisol felt her throat tighten but managed to say that architects need builders, and every person present was holding a hammer of goodwill. The toast ended with applause, echoing down Maple Lane like soft thunder, promising more rain of kindness. That night, Marisol reviewed interview videos, hearing young voices pledged to sit late with scared patients just as she once had. She offered awards to 3 students and smaller grants to 5 more, draining the savings account but filling hearts intensely. Caroline cheered the decisions, certain the house would refill its coffers through unseen avenues of gratitude. Indeed, 2 days later, an envelope arrived from an anonymous donor who had seen the online photos. Inside was a check large enough to fund another year. Marisol laughed out loud, realizing kindness was a boomerang spinning farther each time it was thrown with honest intention. She pinned the check beside Bennett's passbook note, whispered, "We watered another jade plant today," then stepped onto the porch to hear wind chimes Bennett had built singing thank yous into the night. Dawn broke on the day Marisol planned to announce the scholarship winners, and Maple Lane glowed pink as if the sky itself had baked a giant congratulation cake. She set out folding chairs on the lawn, lining them in neat rows so every guest would feel important, just the way Mr. Bennett had made her feel that quiet night. Caroline arrived first with a box of paper lanterns shaped like tiny birdhouses, each punched with star holes that would glow after sunset. Mr. Alvarez followed, carrying a cooler of lemonade and joking that if nurses ran countries, wars would end in bake-offs and hugs. By 10 o'clock, neighbors, hospital staff, and a few wide-eyed scholarship finalists had gathered, their nervous smiles fluttering like ribbons in a gentle breeze. Marisol welcomed everyone, her voice shaking only once before steadying the way her hands used to on a night shift when things got tough. She began by telling the crowd about Mr. Bennett's last request for company and how a single sunset had stretched into weeks of kindness. The finalists listened, clutching folders of dreams, and Marisol saw in their faces the same mix of fear and hope she had felt as a new nurse. She announced the 3 full scholarship recipients first, reading each name slowly so hearts and ears had equal time to celebrate. Tears sparkled on cheeks as the winners stepped forward, receiving simple envelopes that held life-changing promises inside. Next, she announced the 5 partial grants, explaining that even half a door can swing open wide if someone pushes with all their might. Every student received a small jade plant cutting in a painted clay pot, a living reminder that care and patience make good things grow. Dr. Patel spoke about listening before treating, comparing nurses to bridge builders who let patients cross from fear to calm. The maintenance team unveiled a colorful banner reading, "Kindness is contagious. Cough it everywhere," earning a round of happy groans. Caroline played a short video montage of neighborhood volunteers sanding, painting, and laughing, proving that service looked a lot like joy in work boots. When the applause faded, Marisol invited the students to share why they chose nursing, and each story felt like adding a bright thread to a shared quilt. One student, Jamila, recalled translating for her grandmother during clinic visits and wanting to turn confusion into comfort for other families. Another, Luis, spoke of losing a sibling to asthma and deciding that no child should be alone in a hospital hallway gasping for courage. The youngest finalist, 12-year-old mentor Aisha, simply said she loved how bandages could be stickers of bravery if you drew smiley faces on them. Laughter rippled across the lawn, light and freeing, and even the shyest guests relaxed their shoulders as if fear had been given a day off. Marisol then revealed a surprise. The anonymous donor's check allowed every remaining applicant a smaller award toward books, uniforms, or bus fare. Gasps turned into cheers, and one mother hugged her son so tightly his glasses fogged like a winter window. Lantern strings were raised from tree to porch, and sunlight flashed off metal hooks, hinting at the glow to come after dusk. Caroline rolled out a table stacked with foil-covered pans of warm cinnamon rolls, the scent floating across the yard like a sweet homing signal. Mr. Alvarez led a toast with lemonade, saying that kindness tasted like lemon and sugar, tart enough to wake you up, sweet enough to make you stay. Marisol thanked every helper by name, because names are seeds, When spoken with care, they bloom into belonging. She ended by reading Mr. Bennet's final words from a photocopy of his bedside card. Your kindness painted my last day gold, and silence settled soft as silk. A single robin chirped, breaking the hush, and everyone seemed to breathe out at once, releasing a cloud of gentle understanding into the warm air. The scholarship winners planted their jade cuttings along the porch steps, promising to send photos as the plants grew beside their own careers. Afternoon melted into evening, lanterns flickered to life, and the lawn transformed into a galaxy of low stars rooted in grass. Children chased fireflies between the birdhouse tree and the picnic blankets, their laughter blending with the clink of lemonade ice. Jamila played the piano through the open window, stumbling only twice before the melody lifted confident and clear over the gathering. Marisol sat on the swing, feeling the porch boards creak under shared happiness, and imagined Bennett pushing gently from behind, steadying her rhythm. She realized the ache of loss had thinned into a ribbon tying past to present instead of a rope pulling backward. Caroline slipped a new envelope into Marisol's hands, this one containing the house deed officially transferred, signed and stamped that morning. The legal paper felt cool and solid, yet somehow lighter than a cinnamon sugar dusting, because it no longer carried grief, only purpose. Marisol looked at the house, fresh paint glowing gold under lantern light, and whispered that promises, like porches, are meant to be stood upon together. Lanterns swayed, casting bird-shaped shadows that fluttered across the siding like blessings in flight. Above them, the night sky unfurled a deep velvet backdrop, and countless Rayal stars joined the paper ones, as if the universe approved the merger. Marisol closed her eyes, heard wind chimes sing out a soft thank you, and knew that as long as kindness had a key, the door on Maple Lane would never shut. A month later, Marisol worked another quiet night at Riverdale, strolling past room 312 and feeling a gentle tug in her chest as memories glimmered like candlelight, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. The room now held Mrs. Delgado, whose worried eyes flicked around like birds seeking a safe branch, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Marisol knelt to eye level, introduced herself, and noticed the older woman clutched a worn photograph of grandchildren as if it were armor, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Mrs. Delgado whispered she did not fear pain but feared sleeping alone, a sentence that echoed the very words Mr. Bennett had spoken, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. The nurse pulled up the same metal chair, its legs slightly uneven yet loyal, and promised to stay until rest settled in, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. She talked about the scholarship ceremony, describing lanterns shaped like birdhouses and cinnamon rolls disappearing faster than rain on hot pavement, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Mrs. Delgado smiled at the thought of future nurses born from kindness, her shoulders easing against the pillow, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Marisol read the evening's weather report in a playful voice, pretending each cloud had a name and a hobby, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Between giggles, they planned a pretend picnic beneath cloud-capped Fluffington, complete with lemonade rivers and pie mountains, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. The monitors hummed their steady pulse, joining the rhythm of their soft laughter like drums in a distant parade, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Marisol shared that a jade cutting from Mr. Bennett now grew in every scholarship winner's dorm window, each leaf a green flag of hope, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. She explained how the first scholarship check had posted that morning, making textbooks and stethoscopes possible, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Mrs. Delgado closed her eyes, picturing bright students racing down hallways, coats flapping like capes, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. The nurse brushed stray hair from the patient's brow and noticed the same peaceful glow she had once seen at sunset, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Outside, a stray branch tapped the window, keeping time like a conductor guiding an unseen orchestra, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Marisol pulled a small speaker from her pocket and played soft guitar music, explaining it was recorded by Luis, one of the scholarship winners, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. The gentle chords filled the room, weaving around beeps and distant cartwheels, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Mrs. Delgado's breathing slowed to match the lullaby, a calm sea after months of choppy fear, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. She whispered that the melody felt like a letter from tomorrow saying everything would be okay, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Marisol answered that tomorrow often writes back to today when kindness stamps the envelope, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. The clock reached midnight, officially starting Nurse Appreciation Week, though neither woman mentioned it, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. In Maple Lane, lantern birdhouses flickered in the breeze, casting playful shadows on fresh paint, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. Caroline sat on the porch there, grading essays for the next round of applications, her pen moving like a firefly, and the warm night air carried the promise forward while distant sirens hummed like sleepy crickets. She paused to text Marisol a photo of the maple tree, now busy with real birds nesting inside carnival-colored houses, and the warm night air carried the promise forward. The message pinged on Marisol's phone, and she held it up so Mrs. Delgado could admire tiny sparrows perched on bright beams, and the warm night air carried the promise forward. Together they decided the birds were the first patients cured by the Bennett Kind Heart Fund, and the warm night air carried the promise forward. Mrs. Delgado chuckled herself sleepy, eyelids fluttering like slow moths, and the warm night air carried the promise forward. Marisol kept her promise, staying until gentle snores signaled safety, and the warm night air carried the promise forward. She dimmed the lights, stood, and pressed the call button to update the chart, and the warm night air carried the promise forward. Before leaving, she placed a folded paper crane on the bedside table, a tradition new nurses at Riverdale had started after hearing her story, and the warm night air carried the promise forward. As she walked the hallway, cranes peeked from other tables, each wing stamped with the word hope in bright marker. Back at the nurse's station, she opened a thank you email from Jamila describing her first anatomy lab, where she had labeled organs like treasures on a map. Marisol giggled at the student's confession that the cadaver lab smelled less scary when wearing cinnamon lip balm. She forwarded the email to Caroline, adding that kindness now wore scrubs in 3 different cities. A lull settled over the ward, quiet enough to hear the soda machine humming its own bedtime song. Marisol took a deep breath, feeling the weight of fatigue balanced by a stronger weight of purpose. She realized the circle of giving had no finish line, only resting places where new runners joined a relay. In her locker, she found another envelope of coins and notes, proof that even hospital vending change can power miracles when pooled. On impulse, she wrote a sticky note reading, "Cloud Captain Fluffington says keep dreaming," and stuck it to Mrs. Delgado's door. Outside at dawn, she watched peach lights spill over the parking lot, whispered thank you to the sky, and knew the promise would keep flying long after her shift ended. 1 year later, Maple Lane buzzed with gentle excitement as volunteers gathered to turn Mr. Bennett's little blue house into a weekend respite center for tired nurses, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Marisol unlocked the door at sunrise, smiling at fresh lilac blooms that nodded like old friends, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Caroline followed with boxes of donated quilts, each stitched by scholarship students during study breaks, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Jamila arrived carrying a crock pot of cinnamon oatmeal that smelled like warm hugs, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Louise set down a battered guitar, promising soft music for anyone who needed to cry without feeling alone, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Aisha, now a spunky teen volunteer, hung a painted sign reading "Kind Heart Haven, ring bell for cookies," and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Inside, the piano gleamed after a fresh tuning, its keys ready to lift heavy spirits, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Marisol walked room to room, checking that every bedside lamp worked, because kindness should never stumble in the dark, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. She paused at the study door, where birdhouse sketches still lined the walls like cheerful blueprints for hope, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. A soft breeze carried the scent of cut grass through open windows, mixing with lavender sachets Ruth had once sown, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Mr. Alvarez rolled up in his truck, delivering rocking chairs he had built from leftover porch boards, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. He joked that rocking cures sore backs faster than pills if paired with lemonade, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Dr. Patel stacked paperback novels on a shelf labeled 2-chapter breaks, insisting short stories fit between vital sign rounds, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Nearby hospitals sent thank you notes, grateful their nurses would have a place to nap, heal, and laugh, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Marisol pinned the notes beside Bennett's bedside card, turning one man's sunset into a wall shining with many dawns, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. A local bakery donated trays of sugar cookies shaped like tiny jade leaves, glazing them green for luck, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Caroline filled mason jars with lemonade, placing them on every table so no visitor would thirst for comfort, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. The scholarship winners set up a small clinic corner with blood pressure cuffs and first aid kits, ready to patch scraped knees of playground kids, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Neighborhood children chalked bright hopscotch paths across the walkway, writing Step 10 equals smile, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. When the mayor stopped by for a ribbon cutting, Aisha handed her a paper crane stamped hope, and the crowd cheered, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Reporters snapped photos of the jade plant on the kitchen sill, now tall and glossy like a small tree guarding the heart of the home, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. Marisol told them the plant survived because it was watered with stories, not just droplets, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. She explained that every visitor would be asked to share one tale of kindness before leaving, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. By noon, the lawn looked like a festival, birdhouses swinging gently while laughter fluttered between branches, and the early summer stars blinked quietly overhead. A gentle hush fell when Marisol rang a small bell Mr. Bennett once kept on his study desk, calling everyone together. She thanked the crowd for proving that a single late shift could echo through countless days of comfort. Caroline read a letter from Mrs. Delgado, now home and healthy, who wrote that nurses are candles lighting both ends of the night. Louise strummed a new song titled Lantern Hearts, and the melody floated upward like balloons released in unison. Jamila announced that the next group of scholarship winners had promised to mentor middle school kids about health and hope. Mr. Alvarez led a toast with lemonade, declaring the house officially open for weary souls in need of a porch swing serenade. Volunteers cut the ribbon, and applause rolled down Maple Lane like friendly thunder chasing away old clouds. Nurses arrived after long shifts, their eyes tired yet brightening at the sight of rocking chairs and cookie jars. One sat at the piano, playing a gentle tune that stitched quiet spaces between heartbeats. Another curled beneath a quilt, whispering that soft fabric felt louder than praise. Marisol stepped onto porch, breathing lilac-scented air and hearing wind chimes answer with silver laughter. She sensed Bennett's spirit in the sway of the swing and Ruth's warmth in the smell of sugar and cinnamon. As twilight painted the sky peach and violet, paper lanterns lit up, mirroring the birdhouse stars from last year's ceremony. Caroline squeezed Marisol's hand, saying he would be proud, and Marisol nodded, knowing pride was only a seed, joy was the blooming. Together they watched nurses rocking, children laughing, and jade leaves catching dusk light like tiny green lanterns. And when the first real star blinked awake above the roof, Marisol whispered, "Room 312 is everywhere now," certain the circle of kindness would keep spinning long after every lamp was turned low.